Hello and welcome to Mythmakers. Mythmakers is the podcast for fantasy fans and fantasy creatives, brought to you by the Oxford Centre for Fantasy. My name is Julia Golding. I run the activities of our centre, but I'm also an author in the other part of my life. And one of my favourite things is to talk to fellow authors. And I've been joined today by Hannah Kingsley, who is producing, is it your debut title, Hannah?
Yeah, it's my debut.
Which is called Soul Hate, which is coming out in February 2025. But for those of you who are watching this on YouTube, I'll describe for those who are listening, Hannah also has another extraordinary skill, which she is, well, do you call yourself a book maker, bookbinder?
I kind of give book makeovers, I
Book
suppose. You
makeover,
could you
book
could kind of say.
makeoverer. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and she produces the most wonderful artistic versions of books, which hopefully we can talk about a little bit later. So the first question I have for you, Hannah, is what I very often ask guests on this podcast is, who was your favorite fantasy author growing up? Did you have like an entry author who made you think, yeah, I want to do that. I want to read those kind of books?
Um, I mean, I fell in love with books so young. Um, my mum just my mum's a bookworm as well, so I fell in love with books so young. So when I was thinking about this, I think two names really like stood out to me from like childhood, and it was Angie Sage with the Septimus Heap series.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I loved those books. I devoured them. In fact, I still have my very worn, tattered copy in my parents' house. Um, and then the other book was probably like the Ranger's Apprentice series by John Flanagan.
Yes.
So, yeah, those are like
We had
the
those
two.
books. My son has still got them, and they were beautifully bound, weren't they? If you, I don't know, did you get the
Yeah.
hardbound versions, or did you get the hardback versions, or did you get the paperback? Because I remember they were first published in hardbacks, which weren't that expensive. So you
Oh,
could
no, we
actually get
missed them.
lovely
We missed
editions. There
them.
was a stage in the early 2000s when hardbacks weren't that expensive. Yeah, so they're wonderful presentations.
No, yeah, I was about to say, we got them paperback, and I think by that point, like book five or book six was already published by the time I
Okay.
got my hands on them. So I would have loved a hardback version though. I have to go snooping on eBay or something for that later.
Yeah. Well, they're in my attic. See if my son still wants them. Um, must get them out. So your story, Soul Hate, is really a sort of riposte or an answer to the fated lovers trope in fantasy of your, well, it's also in romance, isn't it? Of all sorts. The idea that you have a soulmate who is out there. I've actually produced a whole series of books, teen books, under my Joss Sterling name, which uses this idea of you have a sort of fated person. And I also, like you, I was interested in what happens if the person turns out to be awful.
Yeah.
This, and there's some that was later on in the series. That
Mm.
initially I started with the idea thinking, oh, in Finding Sky, this sounds like a wonderful idea and very romantic. And then by the time I got to about book three, I was thinking, actually, it all can be horribly wrong and evil. And yeah, so I would very much appreciated finding your spin on this of soul hate. So do you want to just outline the sort of legend or the myth underlying the soulmate soul hate dichotomy that you have in your world?
Yeah, so in this world, there exist this bit is the fact. This is the bit that doesn't matter what continent you are, every single person has a soul hate and a soul mate. So soulmate being your traditional love of your life, belong together, the other half of your soul, perfect pairing, supposedly, and it's very much that love at first sight, soulmate idea. But then on the other side of the coin, every thing in nature has balances and checks and opposites. we've got the soul hate, which is the enemies at first sight, that instant, instead of instant, adoration and love, and you've got instant repulsion and hatred and an urge to kill them. And supposedly it's your fated worst nemesis. This is the person that is going to destroy you and everything that you love. And that is determined by fate, who is very much a godly figure. And he has two daughters, the sister of love, sister of hate, and between the three of them, they control these bonds. And everybody has them, and it's known, but it's a matter of chance if you meet them. The statistic I think I threw out there once in the book is like you have a 1 in 10 chance of meeting one of your fated. So it's not it's common enough that people know that it happens, but you also can't waste your life waiting for it to occur, because it could just never happen.
That's interesting. So did you have a think about the size of your population when you were trying to work out your 1 in 10? When you're undoing the world building underlying logic of your world?
Yeah, no, I had to think. I thought long and hard about how the fated system really worked, because what I didn't want is everybody has a soulmate and a soul hate, and everybody meets them all the time, because that leads to a very different world, or like a society. I think it downplays the role that the choices we make throughout our lives has on the outcome of our lives as well. So when I came up with that 1 in 10 figure, I wanted it to be sort of like common enough that, everyone's like, yeah, it happens. It could absolutely happen, but also not so common that you're going to be waiting around, because your soulmate is very likely to be around the corner.
Just I should say that this setup, this mythic setup, is not it doesn't stay in the realms of gods and fate and things. It's very much a story about people living in this system. Yeah,
very much. Yeah, this is we're the fates are there's something that people know about. It's their religious structure, as it were. But this is very much about stories of people dealing with the fallout of a soul hate or a soulmate. And the way I pitched this to my agent was, the PG version is, what if fate was a jerk, and just lived for the drama. And she liked that pitch. So
well, yeah. I mean, absolutely. It's cruel, but also the idea of them being just liking to see suffering has a very long-standing tradition, doesn't it, in the Western canon? Snipping the threads. Yeah, fate doesn't have a very good press.
no.
What stood out for me in your book is actually having a heroine, Renza, who is basically she has a serious role in society. It's like I thought it reminded me of being a young senator in ancient Rome, for example. She's part of the governing structure. She's trying to reform society. She's trying to find funding, and she's interested in what budgets are available for things. These are all crunchy issues. It's not like the princess whose next thing is the ball. It's very much that she is engaged in society in a way where she has influence over events. Do you have any thoughts? Did you? I was wondering if you arrived at her being that kind of person because you have been annoyed by other fantasy heroines or female characters. I mean, what was the thinking about her?
So my thinking for women in general in this book, in particular, is that women can be strong in any number of ways. There is not one way to be strong. I think I have read a lot of books where a strong woman can kick a man's ass 9 ways from Sundays. She's just a ninja with a sword, and I love it. Don't get me wrong. That's really engaging to read about. I really enjoy it. I have definitely, written books in my drawer where that is a skill that the character has, but it is not the only way that a woman can be strong. And I really wanted to write a wide range of women being strong, and have the skills that they have being the skills that are required to save the day, as it were.
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, when it came to Renza, um, I wrote her as someone, she's a young person who's idealistic, intelligent, passionate, actually wants to go out there and change the world, as a lot of young people I think do want to do. They've a lot of people have these ideas, but feel like they can't act on them. So I think by giving Renza that position where she could go and act on them, um, probably a little bit therapeutic.
Yeah, it's more than just a sort of campaigner. She actually has
Mm-hmm.
she seems to enjoy the politics of horse trading, and she understands the point of view of somebody else who may want the budget for, let's say, um, the police, the equivalent of the police force.
Mm.
But she wants to fund the science and technology artists.
Yeah.
And so it feels like she gets a lot of pleasure from being part of that system, like a young MP or a young senator might do. And
Mm.
I thought that struck me as being refreshing to read in a fantasy book, that you bothered to actually imagine somebody running the society. you know,
Yeah. I
how's it
mean,
run? This is how it's run. This is our decisions, how we come up with um things in this world.
yeah, I mean, for me, one of the things when I was world building was, again, I've read a lot of fantasies where the political structure is very much based off of medieval Europe, kings and lords and barons and all of that. But when I was writing about Helise, one, I wanted a world without sexism, because I was writing Helise as an escape. And I didn't want sexism in the world where
Yeah.
Helise was an escape. So that's just not a thing. But I also thought, okay, well, this is my fantasy world. What would I want the political structure to look like? Okay, there would be a democracy of some shape or form, and the people in that democracy should probably be passionate about what they're doing, which would
Mm.
be quite nice. Um, so yeah, I mean, giving Renza, I mean, yeah, I don't know someone who is I'm trying to think how best to say it. Like, all of my friends in their various different jobs in real life do it because they love it. So
Mm.
they don't shy away from the details. And I didn't want to do Renza the injustice of the same, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
You also have two main heroes, as I read it in this book, Nuris and Idris,
Mm,
but yet you avoid a love triangle cliche.
mm.
Want to tell us a little bit about? I'm going to let you do this job because I don't want to reveal too much.
Oh,
You're going to
don't.
have
I'm
such
terrible for that
trouble.
kind
How
of
far are you going to
thing.
go? But anyway, tell us a little bit of what you were thinking as you came up with these two people who are in relationship with Renza.
Yeah. So I guess one inspiration for one of the figures. Again, I'm not sure how much is a spoiler and how much isn't. But one was the very much the classic star-crossed lover, Romeo and Juliet, Montague, Capulet, forbidden relationship aspect. The one that society frowns upon, the one that you shouldn't have. And then the other being the boy next door, that the friends, to are we going to be more than friends, um yeah, the one that everyone's rooting for, as it were. The I think that both play into their own romantic tropes within fantasy genre, or the romantasy genre. um yeah, that's probably an inspiration behind them. I definitely kind of deliberately didn't want a love triangle.
Yeah.
um Again, that's just not a trope that I felt. I do enjoy the romance, love triangle trope on occasion, but it just didn't feel like that would sit with Renza and who she is as a person. She's a very decisive person. She's someone who very much stands on principle, and she wouldn't string two people along. I don't think, not intentionally anyway. Um, she's sort of one of those people that's like, oh, I don't have time for this. I'll just make a decision and move on. Um, but yeah, that, I guess that was the inspiration behind those two men.
I don't think it's a plot spoiler to say one of them is in this situation of being the fated one in a way,
Mm,
soul hate. So stopping there.
yeah.
But just unpacking this idea of soul hate, do you feel that there is an application to things you see in our real world? I'm not talking, it's not like not going as far as an allegory, but I found that I was applying it to situations like um Tutsi and Hutu, or various sort of um unthinking prejudice you might have against somebody from another religion or race, or even next, the next town over, or a different football team. I found myself thinking of those parallels where we have this urge in us just when somebody shows themselves to be different to attack that difference.
Consciously, that's not what I wrote, but I am certainly not mad if that's how people have taken it, because yeah, like now you mention it, it does apply.
Yeah.
I think consciously the way I wrote it was well, I've written it down one second. It was more about, for me, firstly, it was about overcoming bad first impressions and not letting first impressions linger. Um, and then for me, it was more about fighting for your principles, you know, in a world that wants to change you. The world says you've got to do X. That's not who I am. You know, the world is giving me an excuse. It's saying it's okay. It's saying that this is the thing I've got to do. It's giving me the easy out. But I'm not going to do that. That's against who I am. That's not what I stand for. This is who I am. And another part of it, maybe when I worked a corporate job, I was very much the only woman in a very male dominated space. I used to work with a lot of coding. And there were times, as any woman who's ever worked in a workspace will experience, when you get frustrated. There are people that you don't get on with, and you remind yourself that you're not going to act on how annoyed you are, and keep smiling and keep doing your job and get your head down and get it done, and everything is better off for it. So those were sort of that's my conscious input into it, but I think what you said also does apply, so I'm glad for that.
Yeah, good. I think, Tolkien has a famous phrase where he says that he doesn't like allegory because that's in the control of the author, but he likes applicability because that's in the control of the reader.
Mm.
So
I love that. I mean, I deliberately leave some stuff open-ended for the reader to decide what happens. So yeah, my authority stops on the page.
yeah. I'm not going to give too much away because
Yes.
the joys of reading it is finding out all the shocking twists and turns, which it definitely has as a novel. But I was interested in your process. Are you someone who sits down and, right, I'm going to plot this out, or are you one who writes to discover your plot as on the way?
I'm kind of a mixture. I My mum has a nickname for me, and it's chaos, and
Okay.
that would definitely apply to my writing process a little bit, um, particularly at the beginning stages. So I will just get random ideas, but maybe it's a scene, maybe it's a character, maybe it's a concept, maybe it's just like, what would you do to really make this trope entirely different, or you know, those sorts of things. And then I start sort of combining different ideas. I've got like sticky notes everywhere. Like if you look to the other half of the office, it would just be a wall of sticky notes. So the yeah, so it starts kind of with me just writing whatever the scene is, maybe fleshing out the character, maybe fleshing out a little bit of the world building, adding bits in. In this case, it was fleshing out Renza and that first opening chapter. So Halise in the High Chamber and who she was, and then what she cared about, and then the idea all sort of coming together. So once I had fleshed out the main characters, what their goal was, or the things that were important to them, it was very easy for me to then work out, okay, well, how do we threaten that? And to then, once I had all of those groundwork sort of bricks in place, stop, plot, and go back. And then inevitably work out that the plot doesn't work and change it halfway through.
Yeah. Okay. Revision.
Yes, yeah. Chaos is definitely the main way I work, but that's generally the loose way I work. Yeah.
So the politics of your novel remind me very much of the city-states of Renaissance Italy, in that the what she's running or helping run is something that's like, yeah, on that kind of size. It's not a whole vast continent or anything. It's that kind of thing. And that also goes along with the suggestion in the names and the level of technology they've reached. So it's a sort of mid, sort of, I would say a Renaissance kind of technology. You can do tell me if I'm wrong, but that's what I was
No, that's absolutely right. Yeah.
But also you've taken the decision to have vocabulary that's consciously modern in the dialogue. People say, they snark, which is, Americanism, and they say okay, and they say kid. What was your decision behind that blend? And do you have a sort of idea of where your world is, or is it just under, not defined? It doesn't matter. You don't need to define it. It is what it is in the book.
Yeah. So the main decision that I wrote it that way is readability. I think, well, first of all, Soul Hate started off as a YA, and readability is obviously very important, particularly for the younger end of YA, which is where it originally started. Obviously, it is no longer YA for anyone listening. It is definitely adult now, per the brilliant suggestion of my editor. And it's so it started that way for readability, but also I think it's important for maybe people who are new into the fantasy space. So romantasy is drawing, which is probably what this book would be defined as, is drawing a lot of new readers into the fantasy space. And I think readability, unfortunately for fantasy books, can be a big turn off for people for fantasy, like fantastic, like truly fantastic books like Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings can be quite difficult to read, particularly if it's the first time that you're reading a fantasy book, and that could end up putting you off the genre, which would be a crying shame. So I think by having that modern vocabulary throughout, just sort of invites you in a little bit closer and makes it easier to immerse yourself in the world. So yeah, that's where that came from.
Yeah. You also clearly value artisans.
Yes.
In your world. Was it called the market?
The garden.
The garden. Yeah. Not market, the garden.
The market's the other one.
Yeah. I've conflated them in my head. I'm sorry. So do you want to tell us a little bit about your own creativity? And also perhaps choose which way around you do this, and the place of creatives in Soul Hate, because it's very much a described, ornate, embellished, decorated, artistic world that you've created.
Yes. So I guess I'll start with my own creativity. I am very creative, as this will probably show.
So yeah, just so those who are listening, as I mentioned at the beginning, behind Hannah is the most wonderful range of books, which, as I'm looking at it, the pages you've decorated, you've turned them around the other way, and you've decorated the pages as they face outwards. Is that correct?
Yeah. So my business specializes in digital sprayed edges. So I do lots of very intricate design work on sprayed edges, limited editions. But I also do cover foiling, like with that.
What book is that?
That is Fourth Wing.
Yes,
by Rebecca Yarros.
Yeah.
So I do all sorts for special editions. But I didn't obviously start out doing this. My mum is creative as well. I grew up, she was always painting with her watercolors, and I was in art lessons from being a kid, piano lessons too. Um, and so my mum always fostered my creativity. I'm the girl that always said that she wanted to be a writer from when she was a little girl. I always knew what I wanted to do. I was the girl that was begging my mum to let me on the computer to write my story, because if my mum didn't, limit my screen time, I'd be writing my story all day, every day until 4 o'clock in the morning. So yeah, I mean, I've got lots of different outlets for creativity. But one of the ones that I think they'll lead on through in a minute is that I also, known fact, I have a chemistry degree where I had a focus on quantum chemistry. And that also required a degree of creativity. And I think oftentimes the STEM subjects like engineering, physics, chemistry, architecture, all of those sort of like STEM subjects, scientific subjects, there's a perception that they don't allow for creativity, which I think is a crying shame, because problem solving is creativity. It's you're working within the rules of your science, your subject matter, as much as an artist works within the realms of their medium. And that's kind of, I guess, where I wanted, when I was building the garden, I wanted to have women in particular, but artisans of all kinds, STEM and art, whether they're music, they're writers, they're jewelers, they're architects, they're engineers, whatever it is they're doing, they're still artisans, they're still creatives, they're still important. And how what they give when nurtured just makes a place just more beautiful than it was before. So I guess that's kind of what I did with the book.
I suppose I should ask you at this point, in case someone is looking at this and thinking, wow, I'd really love to get an edition of these. So are you doing these for publishers, or is it like single commissions by fans of the book who send you a hardback? How does it work, the
Oh
business?
yeah, sure. So I do work for publishers as well. Sometimes they'll want like a limited run of a book, because I can work to a minimum of one. So I can also do custom commissions straight for readers, but I also do my own designs that I put up for sale, um, that people can buy from my website. So yeah, there's sort of a mixture. So if there's a particular book, say, that's just really meaningful to you, and you want a complete unique special edition, you can hire me to give it a complete makeover, or you can look at the titles I've got available on my website and buy one of those, or keep an eye out on your favorite publisher.
Yeah, I'll make sure I include that as a link in the show notes. So, um, I always think of fantasy as very good as framing difficult things in thought-provoking packages. You can move into a fantasy world, things that trouble you in our real world, and have a look at them.
Mm.
Um, so where are you going next on your writing journey? Have you got plans? I'm sure you have.
Uh,
You told me you were the little girl who was always writing.
as per my contract, book 2 and 3. Um, so I've got to write the rest of the trilogy first, which is fine because I'm 80% of the way through book 2 at the moment and raring to go for book 3. After this, who knows? Definitely more writing. I have lots of, to say I have lots of ideas is probably an understatement. I think there's still a lot that could be explored in this world with this concept of soul hates and soulmates, that just even 3 books is not enough to get through it.
Mhm.
I think there's a lot there. I'd love to explore feminine rage. I'd love to explore that as a theme. The bonds of sisterhood. I'd love to explore that as well. And maybe play with some other tropes, some other well loved ideas or concepts in the fantasy space. See
Yeah,
if I
unpack the
can.
Dark Lord.
Yeah, exactly. You
Yeah,
know, unpack the chosen one. You know,
yeah.
okay, what if the chosen one is the wrong chosen one? What if they got it wrong? What if he fails? What if?
I quite like the fact in the Harry Potter series that
Mm.
actually it could also have been Neville.
Exactly. I love that. I love it's one of those ones. Okay, and what if everyone thought it was Harry all this time, and then Neville just comes out here surprising everybody?
It is kind of
Like,
him too, because without
yeah,
him it would have failed. So I like that fact that she undercut the chosen one this at the end.
yeah, exactly. I mean, it's one of those. All of those. There are so many tropes out there, and they've been done so well for so long for a really good reason because they're great tropes. So let's see what else we can add to it. Let's see what other spins we can do for it that give it something a bit different because we know them
Yeah.
and we love them and they're always going to be absolute classics. So we can absolutely play with them a little bit.
Yeah. Do you have a fantasy tip for listeners, something that they might want to read or watch or do as a creative?
It's kind of boring, but like read and watch widely, not just within your genre. Definitely take steps outside of your genre. If you are a strictly fantasy, for sake of argument, medieval fantasy, that's your thing. You love it. Read some sci-fi, read some horror, read some speculative, because that will broaden your horizons. It will introduce new, maybe not necessarily new ideas, because I feel like fantasy can apply almost everything, but it may put it in a different light. But the other thing is, I like to play games with what I'm watching or reading. So it will be games like, okay, what's the strangest thing that could happen right now, and how would I rewrite what I've watched so far
Mm.
so that it makes absolute plausible sense? Or I would take a character from one TV show, be like, right, he's now in this. He understands the rules of the game. Um, how does it change having this character here? Or how does it change to have this MacGuffin suddenly here? And just play sort of that game in my head of, okay, well, how would that change the story? How would that change the narrative? And sometimes it can be hilarious. Sometimes it can be unexpected. And it's a great way to pass the time if you're waiting for the bus, or if you're on a long journey, or if you're in a long car journey with some other creatives and you're looking for a way to pass the time. Can Yeah, it's yeah, those are the kind of things that I play.
I have long conversations with my eldest son
Mm.
about things like the Marvel universe.
Yeah.
How what characters you might, because he's in deep into the lore of the comics. What
Yeah.
what would make it interesting if there's been a Marvel film that failed in some way, which of course there has been a few. What would you do to make this work? I mean,
Yeah, that
that's a
sort of thing.
really
Like, how
interesting
would
thought.
you change it?
Yeah.
Okay, so um going back to Harry Potter. Okay, cool. Iron Man is now part of this universe. How does
Yeah.
that change things? Tony Stark is joining Harry Potter in the fight against Voldemort.
Or
How does that
joining
change things?
Voldemort. In
Like,
his unreformed days, he might have been selling weapons to Voldemort. You can see that happening.
exactly. Like, it just changes the rules, makes it more interesting, and I think it ends up affecting all of the writing or the creative
Mm.
stuff that comes out of you, because suddenly you're breaking a lot of the rules in your thinking for what a traditional setting might be. Your traditional, harping back to Lord of the Rings because it's well known, your traditional setting in your kingdoms, your political structure. Suddenly, if Iron Man turns up, that changes all of the rules. What is and isn't possible? How would people react? Would people be happy? Would they be cross? Would they call him a witch? Probably. But yeah.
Yeah, game playing, great source of creativity. So we always finish with thinking where in all the fantasy worlds is the best place for something. And I was struggling to come up with a one for you. And I thought actually, because at the heart of this is the idea of being fated,
Mm,
and that the fates themselves exist in certain under different guises in many a pantheon,
mm,
or even in going back to the idea of the chosen one, that has the idea of being fated to do something.
mm.
So where would you, and then I thought, well, I can't ask where's the best place because mostly meeting fate is rubbish.
I
you
was
know
about to say, even outside of my book, most
yeah.
people don't enjoy meeting fate.
So I've put in the Chinese thing of may you live in interesting times. I thought, where would you think playing this game, where do you think would be most interesting to go and meet fate? To have that experience of seeing a fate working out in a fantasy world and perhaps disrupting it.
I mean, well, in my book, it's got to be situational, depending on where you are, depends on what you're then forced to do next. If you're in the holy states where they very much believe in fate, you got to do whatever fate tells you to do. If fate tells you to blow up a building, you got to do it. Fate told you to do it, you got to do it, and you'd be forced to do it, and that would be quite interesting. But if you were somewhere like Malaya, which is briefly mentioned in the book, they'd probably be like, maybe don't do that. Maybe take a chill pill. So I think it's very much situational. I think if you met like the fates, like straight up met them, I think whatever happens would be terrifying.
Yeah, so if you're going to play your game and you're going to take your soul hate idea into another fantasy book, where would you like to plonk it down and see what happens?
If we're sticking with the idea that fate is a jerk,
an
absolute jerk, and just living for the drama, I think Lord of the Rings could use a shake up. That would be quite funny. I'm trying to think what else would be a good fantasy settings to just suddenly throw in like the most terrible soulmates and soul hates pairings you could think of. Honestly, like I know there's a concept of fate or force in Star Wars, but I think that could be quite funny.
Yes, because that's quite cerebral. That it's not in the realms of like person to person, is it? It's a force, two sorts of forces, and people inhabit those forces. Yours is personal animus that you're exploring.
Yeah, exactly.
I think it'd be quite fun to sort of throw it into something like, I don't know, Peter Pan or Wind in the Willows. Suddenly kind of explode the worlds and say, right.
Yeah, exactly. Like I was just thinking, like you could throw it into something like the Marvel movies, and just see how that affects it.
Because what I like about the idea of the soul hate is your soul hate isn't an evil person, it's just someone who is not you.
Yeah, it can be anyone. And
how do you work together with somebody who is your chalk to your cheese?
Every time you look at them, you are filled with the urge to physically murder them. Like it's a physical violence reaction. And even if you're not a violent person, you will be filled with this absolute full body disgust and loathing.
Hannah, thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to seeing not only this book in print but also your version of it when you get to give it its own makeover in your wonderful studio. So thank you very much for talking to us.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to Mythmakers podcast, brought to you by the Oxford Centre for Fantasy. Visit oxfordcenterforfantasy.org to join in the fun. Find out about our online courses, in-person stays in Oxford, plus visit our shop for great gifts. Tell a friend and subscribe wherever you find your favourite podcasts worldwide.